Before we play our factoring games, I wanted to quickly review FOIL. So if you remember from Algebra 1, FOIL stands for first, outer, inner, last. And usually this is a concept that students are pretty familiar with by the time they start to factor, and they remember it when they're in Algebra 2 and Pre-Calc and so on. So if I do first, that means I multiply my first terms together. So I have 3x times 2x, which ends up being 6x squared. And outer ends up being 3x times 1, which is 3x. Inner is negative 4x. And last is negative 2 times 1, which is negative 2. So as I said, it stands for first, outer, inner, and last. And now the key to factoring using the reverse of FOIL is really those middle terms, the outer and the inner. So if I look at my outer and my outer is 3x and my inner is negative 4x. And if you notice, those two terms are like terms. So it combines to be 6x squared minus x minus 2. So when I'm factoring, I'm going to use the reverse FOIL, and there's two main concepts that I want you to remember. So I always tell my students to look for a GCF. So if I have my terms 3, 7, and negative 6, I look to see if they have any common factor. So it looks like maybe they would have 3, but 3 doesn't go into 7, so it's not a GCF. So if there's no GCF originally, there's not going to be a GCF in one of the smaller factors. For instance, I'm not going to have like 3x minus 6, because then I could pull out a 3 and have 3 times the quantity of x minus 2. So I always tell my students about that, and I use, like numbers like 107 to show them. I say, 7 doesn't go into 100, so there's no way that 7 could go into 25 or 10 or any smaller factor of 100. And that's the same concept with polynomials as well. So number 2, so once you put in numbers that satisfy the first and the last terms, we're going to check the outer and inner swoops. So one thing that I think we as math teachers sometimes do wrong, and I'm guilty of it as well, is I'll say things like, oh, we just want the number that multiplies to be this and adds to be this. So we say that for polynomials that look like x squared minus 5x minus 6, where there's a 1 in front of the x squared. But that really confuses our students because they're always thinking about that when they get to the ones that don't have a 1, like this 3x squared plus 7x minus 6. They're trying to find numbers that multiply to be negative 6 and add to be 7. And we don't want them to do that. Okay, so we have to be very, very careful about the terminologies we use. We have to say, things like, oh, we want our last numbers to multiply to be negative 6, but we want the outer and inner swoops to combine to be 7. So here's what I want to show you with this. So I set up my two sets of parentheses, and I know in order to get the 3x squared for my first terms, I need a 3x and x. That way they'll multiply to be the first, which is 3x squared. Likewise, I need my last terms to multiply to be negative 6. And I have some choices here. So for negative 6, I could have 1 and 6, and I could have 2 and 3. And I know that they need to be opposite signs. But if you remember the thing I told you about the GCF, there was no GCF originally, so I can't put a 3 here, because there'd be a GCF, right, with a 3x and a 3. And likewise, I can't put a 6 here. And that's a very, very important thing for students to learn, because if you know the GCF concept, you're going to be able to eliminate most of your possibilities, which makes this much faster. So sometimes I hear students say, oh, the guess and check method, I remember that from Algebra 1, I hated that. But if you know the shortcuts to the guess and check method, it makes it so much faster. So that's what we're trying to do here. So that means I only have possibilities of 1 and 2. So let's say I try the 2. I'm going to go ahead and put the 2 there, and then that means I would need a 3 on the outer. So right now I'm good because I have my 3x and x multiplied to be 3x squared, my first terms, and my 2 and my 6 will multiply to be negative 6 as long as they're different signs. So this is where the outer and inner swoop come into play. So I'm going to look at my outer and my inner. So 3x times 9x, or 3x times x, 3x times 3 is 9x, and 2 times x is 2x. I want them to combine to be 7x, so I need a positive and I need a negative. So I need a positive there and a negative here in order for it to work. And that's the goal with these factoring games that we're going to play. So here's what our factoring game is going to look like. You're going to have lots of slips of paper. So these little guys will kind of move around as if they're my little slips of paper. And we can put them in different orders. So some people kind of like to organize. They like to put all their 2x's together, all of their x's together, all of their 3x's together. That's fine if you want to do that. And we start to look at the first one, and we have 2x squared minus 9x plus 10. So we know we definitely need a 2x. So let's say we put a 2x minus 5. Well, then that means on the end, I need them to multiply to be 10, right? Positive 10. So I'm going to need something with a minus 2. And the first term has to be an x, right? So as I have it set up, I have 2x and x make 2x squared, so I'm good. And I have negative 5 and negative 2 combined to be positive 10. So here's where the outer and inner come into play. And the reason I like these little pieces of paper is because it forces the students to look at that. So they're looking at the outer swoop and inner swoop, and they're not writing anything down, but they're seeing it in their head. I always say they have to feel it in their gut. So when I have 2x minus 2, they have negative 4x, and they have negative 5x, and then those do combine to be negative 9x, so they know they're good. Okay, so we're forcing them to check the outer and inner by doing this process. So likewise with this one, I have 2x squared, so I only have one thing left. I have this 2x plus 5 down here. Whoops. So I'm going to pull that 2x plus 5 over, and then I'm going to have an x minus 2 because I need it to multiply to be a negative 10 on the end, and the first ones need to multiply to be 2x squared. Then I check my outer and my inner. So I have negative 4x and I have 5x. So if I add those together, I get positive 1x, which is what I wanted. Okay? So this is what you're going to do in your groups. And you're going to very quickly do a whole bunch of factoring problems with this process. And hopefully after you do one round, you're really going to realize how quick this process can be, and then ideally we'll be able to do it without the little slips of paper. So typically I have 7 different levels for my students to do. So today we're just going to do one, but as I see students starting to get it, I give them harder and harder levels. I try to differentiate a little bit within that. So let's go ahead and play the games and we'll discuss afterwards.